Maybe you know what it feels like to scroll through your phone at 2 in the morning and see everyone else living the dream you prayed for. Maybe you've sat in your car in an empty parking lot, staring at someone else's success, wondering what you did wrong. Maybe you've whispered to God in the dark, asking if He even remembers your name. If that's you tonight, this story is for you, because I lived it, and I'm here to tell you. He never forgot. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm an artist, or at least I was trying to be. I lived in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment on the east side of Fort Worth, Texas, where the rent was cheap and the walls were thin enough to hear my neighbor's TV through the drywall. My studio was a corner of the living room, an old wooden easel, a folding table covered in dried paint, and a window that let in dusty Texas sunlight every afternoon around 3. I'd stand there sometimes, brush in hand, staring at a half-finished canvas, wondering if anyone would ever care. It started on a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays were the day I let myself check social media. I'd learned to ration it, the way you ration something that hurts. I opened Instagram, and there it was. My old roommate from art school standing in front of a gallery in Austin, champagne glass in hand, surrounded by people in black turtlenecks and expensive glasses. The caption said, "Overwhelmed by the love tonight. Solo's show sold out. Grateful beyond words." I stared at that photo for a long time, longer than I want to admit. I felt my chest tighten and that familiar ache that starts somewhere behind your ribs and spreads until your whole body feels heavy. I scrolled further. Another friend, this one got a grant to study in Florence. Another one landed a teaching position at a university in Nashville. Another one was featured in a magazine I used to dream about being in. And me? I was sitting on a futon that doubled as my couch, eating reheated pasta, watching the Texas sun sink lower through my blinds. I set the phone down, picked it up again, set it down. I wanted to be happy for them. I really did. But all I felt was this gnawing, ugly thing in my stomach. Envy. The kind that tastes like copper. The kind that makes you feel small and ashamed at the same time. I walked over to my easel. There was a painting I'd been working on for 3 weeks, a landscape of the Texas hill country, all gold and rust and fading light. I thought it was good. I really did. But who was I kidding? No one was going to see it. No gallery was calling. No curator was knocking on my door. I had an Instagram account with 200 followers, half of them bots. I had an email inbox full of rejection letters from galleries that didn't even bother to personalize them. Thank you for your submission. Unfortunately, it does not align with our current vision. I must have read that line 50 times. Each time it stung a little less and hurt a little more. That weekend, I went to a coffee shop downtown. It was one of those places with exposed brick and Edison bulbs, where everyone looked like they were working on something important. I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window, pretending to sketch. But really, I was just watching. A group of people I recognized from art school walked in. I hadn't seen them in 2 years. They were laughing, talking loudly, and one of them, a girl named Simone, was showing everyone something on her phone. I kept my head down, but I could hear her. Yeah, the Times picked it up. I couldn't believe it. They said it was hauntingly intimate. I cried when I read it. Everyone congratulated her. Someone bought her a pastry. They took a group photo. I sat there, 15 feet away, invisible. I wanted to leave, but I also wanted them to see me. I wanted someone to say, "Hey, aren't you?" I wanted to matter, but I didn't. So I finished my coffee, packed up my sketchbook, and walked out into the heat. The drive home felt longer than it should have. I turned on the radio, some Christian station my mom used to listen to, but I turned it off after 30 seconds. I didn't want to hear about blessings. I didn't want to hear about favor. I wanted to know why it felt like God had handed out gifts to everyone but me. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop. I told myself I was going to work on my portfolio. But instead, I opened a folder labeled Submissions and scrolled through years of emails. Application after application. Proposal after proposal. All those hours writing artist statements, cropping images, filling out forms. And for what? I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. The paint was peeling in one corner. I wondered how long it would take for the landlord to notice. I wondered how long it would take for God to notice me. Maybe I missed my moment. The thought came quietly, but it landed hard. Maybe I'd waited too long. Maybe I should have pushed harder when I was younger. Maybe I didn't have what it took. Maybe this whole thing, this dream of being an artist, of making something that mattered, maybe it was just that. A dream. And dreams don't pay rent. I thought about my parents. They never said it out loud, but I knew they were worried. My mom would call every Sunday and ask how things were going, and I'd say, "Good." "Yeah, still painting." And she'd pause, that long pause that said more than words. And then she'd say, "Well, that's good, honey. As long as you're happy." But I wasn't happy. I was tired. I was jealous. I was ashamed of being jealous. And I was angry. Angry at myself, angry at the world, and, if I'm being honest, angry at God. I pulled out my old sketchbook from college, the one with the warped cover and paint smudges on every page. I flipped through it slowly. There was a drawing I'd done during my sophomore year. A girl standing in front of an open door, light pouring in, her hand reaching toward it. I remembered the day I drew it. I remembered thinking, this is it. This is what I'm supposed to do with my life. I closed the book, set it on the table, looked out the window at the fading Texas sky. I see what you make when no one's watching. The thought came so softly, I almost missed it. Not a voice, not a sound. Just a knowing. A whisper beneath the noise. But I didn't know what to do with it. So I sat there in the quiet, in that small apartment with the dusty sunlight, and I let the envy settle into something heavier. Something like apathy, because envy at least still cares. Apathy is when you stop asking God why. Apathy is when you stop believing the answer even matters. And that night, for the first time in a long time, I didn't pray. He never forgot. But I didn't know that yet. The decision didn't come all at once. It came in pieces like paint peeling off a wall. A little here, a little there, until one day you look up and realize there's nothing left to hold on to. It was late October when I started packing things away. The Texas heat had finally broken, and the evenings carried that cool edge that makes you want to sit on a porch with a blanket and watch the sky change colors. But I didn't have a porch. Just a window that looked out onto a parking lot and a dumpster that the raccoons got into every Thursday night. I've been staring at my easel for 3 days, not painting, just staring. There was a canvas on it, half finished, like everything else in my life. I'd started it with so much hope. It was supposed to be different this time. Better. Something people would notice. but every time I picked up a brush, my hand felt heavy. The colors felt wrong. The whole thing felt like a lie I was telling myself. On a Tuesday night, I finally did it. I took the canvas off the easel and leaned it against the wall, facing backward. Then I started putting my brushes away, one by one. I cleaned them first, the way you're supposed to, running them under warm water until the color bled out and the bristles ran clear. I dried them with a paper towel and slid them into an old coffee can. It felt like a funeral. Next came the paints. I'd collected them over years, some of them gifts, some of them splurges I couldn't afford. Cadmium yellow, burnt sienna, Prussian blue. I lined them up on the folding table and just looked at them for a while. Each one was a little prayer I'd prayed with my hands. Each one was a piece of hope I'd squeezed onto a palette, thinking this time would be different. I put them in a cardboard box, sealed it with packing tape, wrote art supplies on the side with a Sharpie. My handwriting looked shaky. Then I opened my laptop. My portfolio website had been sitting there for 2 years, mostly untouched except for the occasional update when I finished something I thought was worth showing. I stared at the home page. My name in a clean sans serif font, a grid of images below it, a contact button that no one ever clicked. I moved the cursor to the delete button, hovered there. My finger rested on the trackpad. What if someone sees it tomorrow? What if this is the day someone finally notices? But I'd been telling myself that for 2 years. And the only emails I got were spam and rejection letters. I clicked delete. The confirmation box popped up. Are you sure you want to permanently delete this site? I clicked yes. The screen went white. Then it was gone. Years of work, hundreds of hours, all of it, just gone. I closed the laptop, sat back, felt nothing. That's the thing about giving up. It doesn't feel dramatic. It just feels empty. My phone buzzed. It was my mom. I let it ring. She called again. I answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, honey," she said, her voice warm and careful, the way it always was when she was worried. "Just checking in. How are you?" "I'm fine," I said. "You sound tired." "I am tired." There was a pause. I could hear the TV in the background at her house, my dad watching the news. "How's the art going?" she asked. I looked at the box of paints on the floor, at the easel with nothing on it, at the blank space on the wall where my portfolio used to live. "It's going," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. "You know," she said slowly, "there's no shame in trying something else. Your father and I just want you to be happy and stable. You've been at this for a long time, sweetheart." I closed my eyes. "I know, Mom. There are good jobs out there. Benefits. Security. You could still paint on the side, as a hobby. A hobby." The word sat in my chest like a stone. "Yeah," I said. "Maybe." "I'm not trying to discourage you," she said quickly. I worry. You're so talented, honey. But talent doesn't always pay the bills." "I know." "Okay," she said softly. "Well, I love you. Call me if you need anything." "I will. Love you too." I hung up, set the phone down, stared at the ceiling. She wasn't wrong. Talent didn't pay the bills. Talent didn't get you a gallery show. Talent didn't make people care, and I was tired of pretending it would. I got up and walked over to the closet, pulled out an old storage bin from the back and opened it. Inside were things from college, sketchbooks, old assignments, photos from art shows I'd been part of when I still believed I had a future. I pulled out a sketchbook from my first year. The pages were warped from use, the corners bent and smudged. I flipped through it slowly. There were studies of hands, portraits of classmates, a sketch of a tree outside the library where I used to sit between classes. And then, near the back, I found it. A drawing of a door. Not just any door, an open door. Light was pouring through it, bright and clean. And there was a figure standing in front of it, just a silhouette, hand reaching toward the light. I'd drawn it during a particularly hard semester, when I wasn't sure if I was good enough to keep going. I remembered sitting in my dorm room, late at night, feeling like I was drowning, and then drawing this. I didn't know why. I just felt like I needed to. I'd written something in the margin, faint, in pencil. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. Jeremiah 29:11. I'd memorized it in Sunday school as a kid. My mom used to quote it to me when I was stressed about tests or friendships or all the small things that felt enormous back then. I stared at the verse, at the door, at the light, and I felt nothing. I closed the sketchbook, put it back in the bin, shoved the whole thing back into the closet. I didn't want to think about expected ends. I didn't want to think about God's plans. Because if this was the plan, years of obscurity, years of trying and failing and watching everyone else succeed, then I didn't understand it. And I was tired of pretending I did. I turned off the lights and lay down on the futon. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the occasional sound of a car passing outside. I stared at the dark ceiling and let the exhaustion settle into my bones. I thought about praying. I even started to. But the words felt stuck, like they couldn't make it past my throat. Lord, I whispered into the dark, I've tried everything. That was all I could manage. I waited for something, a feeling, a thought, a whisper, but there was only silence. I rolled over, pulled the blanket up to my chin, and closed my eyes. You don't need to quit. You just need to rest. The thought came so quietly, I almost didn't hear it. It wasn't loud. It wasn't forceful. It was just there, like a hand on my shoulder, like someone sitting beside me in the dark, saying, I know you're tired. I see you. But I didn't know what to do with it. Rest felt like giving up. Rest felt like admitting defeat. And I was so tired of losing. So I let the thought fade. Let the silence return. Let sleep pull me under. He never forgot. But I had forgotten how to believe that. The days after that blurred together. I stopped counting them, stopped marking time. I'd wake up, go to work at the coffee shop where I'd picked up shifts to pay rent, come home, eat something that didn't require much effort, and go to bed. Repeat. The apartment felt different now, emptier. The corner where my easel used to be looked like a gap in a smile, something missing that you can't stop noticing. I told myself I felt relief. No more pressure. No more failed expectations. No more wondering if today would be the day something changed. But relief is supposed to feel light, and I felt heavy, like I was walking through water. Like every step took effort I didn't have. November came. The Texas sun hung lower in the sky, and the light through my window turned golden and soft in the afternoons. I used to love that light. Used to set up my easel right there so I could paint in it. Now I just close the blinds. One Saturday morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing. A text from my landlord. Inspection next week. Need to check the AC unit and smoke detectors. Please make sure the apartment is accessible. I looked around. The place wasn't exactly a mess, but it wasn't clean either. There were dishes in the sink, mail piled on the counter, and the closet. I hadn't opened that closet in weeks. I knew what was in there. Boxes, memories, things I didn't want to look at. But if the landlord was coming, I needed to at least make it look like I had my life together. I spent the morning cleaning, wiping down counters, doing dishes, vacuuming the floor. When I got to the closet, I hesitated. My hand rested on the doorknob. I could just leave it. He probably wouldn't even look inside. But something in me said, open it. I did. The closet was smaller than I remembered. Just a few boxes stacked against the back wall, some old coats I never wore, a vacuum cleaner I should have been using more often. I pulled out the boxes one by one, setting them on the floor. Most of them were labeled. Books, winter clothes, miscellaneous. And then there was one without a label. Just an old cardboard box, the kind you get from a liquor store with the flaps folded over each other to keep it closed. I didn't remember packing it. Didn't remember putting it in there. I sat down on the floor and opened it. Inside were things from college. My first semester, maybe my second. There was a program from an art show I'd been part of. A few ribbons from competitions I'd forgotten I'd entered. A stack of graded assignments with professor notes scribbled in red ink. And underneath all of it, wrapped in an old t-shirt, was a sketchbook. I pulled it out carefully. The cover was black, the corners worn soft from use. My name was written on the front in silver Sharpie. The letters faded now. I opened it. The first few pages were studies. Hands, eyes, fabric folds. The kind of thing you do when you're learning how to see. I flipped through slowly, and with each page I remembered. Late nights in the studio, the smell of charcoal, the sound of pencils scratching against paper, the feeling that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Halfway through the book, I stopped. There was a drawing I didn't remember making. Or maybe I did, and I'd just forgotten. A door. A simple wooden door, standing open, light pouring through it so bright it almost hurt to look at. And in front of the door, a figure. Just a silhouette. No details. Just a shadow reaching toward the light. I stared at it for a long time. Something about it felt familiar. Not just because I'd drawn it, but because I'd seen it before. Recently. Or maybe I dreamed it. I couldn't tell. I turned the page. There, in the margin, in my handwriting from years ago, was a verse. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord. Thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. Jeremiah 29:11. I'd written it there and forgotten about it. Tucked it away in a box in a closet in an apartment I never thought I'd still be living in. And now, years later, here it was again, staring back at me like it had been waiting. I set the sketchbook down on my lap and leaned back against the wall. My chest felt tight, but not in the way it had before. Not in the way that made me want to cry or scream or give up. This was different. quieter, like something inside me was waking up after a long sleep. I thought about that verse. An expected end. I used to think that meant a good ending, a happy ending, the kind where everything works out the way you hoped it would. But sitting there on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by boxes of things I'd tried to forget, I wondered if maybe it meant something else. Maybe it meant an ending that God expected. Not me, not my plans or my timing or my version of success. His. I looked at the drawing again. The open door, the light, the figure reaching toward it. I'd drawn this during my sophomore year. I remembered now. It was the week before finals, and I'd been having a crisis. Not about grades, about purpose. I'd started questioning whether I was good enough, whether art mattered, whether God even cared about the things I cared about. And one night, alone in my dorm room, I'd opened my sketchbook and drawn this. I didn't know why at the time. I just felt like I needed to. And I'd written that verse in the margin because it was the only thing I could think of that made me feel less alone. Now, sitting here years later, I realized something. The door was the same. Not literally, but the image. It was the same one I'd been trying to paint in my art school dream project, the one I'd submitted to galleries, the one I'd poured hours into, thinking it would be the thing that changed everything. I'd forgotten it started here. In a sketchbook, in a moment of doubt, in a whispered prayer I didn't even know I was praying. I ran my fingers over the drawing. The paper was soft, worn from time. An expected end, I whispered out loud. The door has always been there. I'm the one who opens it. The thought came like a breath. Not my own. Something gentler, something that felt like it had been waiting for me to be still enough to hear it. I closed my eyes, felt the words settle. The door has always been there. I'd been so focused on trying to force it open, on pushing and pleading and proving I was worthy of walking through it. And all this time, maybe I wasn't supposed to open it at all. Maybe I was just supposed to trust that when the time was right, he would. I sat there for a while. I don't know how long. The apartment was quiet. No TV next door, no cars passing outside. Just me and the light coming through the window and a sketch I'd made when I still believed. I picked up the sketchbook and stood up, walked over to the corner where my easel used to be. The space still felt empty, but now it felt like a different kind of empty. Not the absence of something, the anticipation of something. I set the sketchbook on the windowsill, propped open to the page with the door. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something stir. Not hope exactly, not yet, but something close, something quiet and small, like the first green shoot pushing through frozen ground. Maybe I wasn't done. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe God was just waiting for me to stop trying so hard and start trusting that he'd been writing this story all along. He never forgot. And maybe, just maybe, I was starting to remember. 3 weeks passed. I kept the sketchbook on the windowsill. Every morning when I woke up, I'd see it there, propped open to that drawing of the door. The light would hit it differently depending on the time. Soft and golden in the afternoon, pale and cool in the early morning. I didn't touch it, didn't move it. I just let it sit there, like a question I wasn't ready to answer. I went back to work, pulled espresso shots, wiped down tables, smiled at customers, and pretended I had my life together. It was easier that way. Easier to focus on the routine. Wake up, work, come home, sleep, repeat. No big dreams. No crushing disappointments. Just the steady rhythm of survival. But something had shifted. I couldn't name it. Couldn't explain it. But it was there. Like the air before a storm. Like the moment right before the sun breaks through the clouds. I'd catch myself thinking about colors, about compositions, about that open door and what it might look like if I painted it again. Really painted it. Not for a gallery or a portfolio or anyone else. Just for me. Just to see if I still could. I didn't act on it. Not yet. The box of art supplies was still sealed in the closet. The easel was still folded up and leaning against the wall. But the thought was there. Quiet, persistent, like a seed that had been planted and was waiting for the right moment to break through the soil. It was a Tuesday morning in late November when my phone rang. I was still in bed, half asleep, the kind of drowsy where you're not sure if you're awake or dreaming. I almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, and I'd trained myself to ignore unknown calls because they were usually spam or someone trying to sell me something I didn't need. But something made me pick up. Hello? My voice was rough with sleep. Hi, is this... There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. Is this the artist who submitted work to the Westwood Gallery a few years back? I sat up. My heart kicked against my ribs. Yeah. Yes, that's me. Great, the voice said. It was a woman, mid-40s maybe, professional but warm. My name is Caroline Mercer. I'm the curator at Westwood Gallery here in Fort Worth. I know this is out of the blue, but I was going through some old submissions, and I came across your portfolio. The piece with the open door. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. I stared at the wall, at the morning light coming through the blinds, trying to process what I was hearing. Are you still there? She asked. Yeah, I managed. I'm here. I know it's been a while, she said, her tone apologetic. We get so many submissions, and sometimes things fall through the cracks. But I saw your work again last week, and it stayed with me. I wanted to reach out and see if you'd be interested in showing with us. We have a slot opening up in January. Small show, but intimate. The kind of space where people actually stop and look. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. I don't know what to say. She laughed softly. You don't have to say anything right now. I know it's a lot. But I wanted to reach out. I think your work deserves to be seen. If you're interested, we can set up a time to meet and talk through the details. Yes, I said, the word tumbling out before I could stop it. Yes, I'm interested. Wonderful, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I'll email you some information, and we can go from there. Thank you. Really, I'm excited about this. Thank you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She hung up. I sat there holding my phone, staring at the screen like it might disappear if I looked away. A gallery show. After years of silence, years of rejection, years of feeling invisible. Someone had seen my work. Someone had remembered it. Someone wanted to show it. I stood up, my legs shaky, and walked over to the window. The sketchbook was still there, the open door catching the morning light. I picked it up, held it in my hands, and felt something inside me crack open. Not break. Open. Like a door that had been locked for too long, finally giving way. I thought about the verse in the margin. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. An expected end. Not my timing. His. I set the sketchbook down and walked over to the closet. Pulled out the box of art supplies, broke the seal, opened it. The paints were still there, the brushes, everything I'd packed away in defeat. I pulled them out one by one, setting them on the folding table, and as I did, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not hope, not yet, but possibility. The email from Caroline came an hour later. I read it 3 times, just to make sure it was real. She wanted to meet on Thursday. She wanted to see more of my work. She wanted to talk about the vision for the show. I closed my laptop and just sat there, staring at nothing, feeling everything. I thought about calling my mom, thought about texting my old friends from art school, thought about posting something on social media. But I didn't, not yet. Because this moment, this fragile, trembling moment, felt too sacred to share. It felt like something between me and God. Like a whisper I'd been waiting years to hear. I walked back over to the easel, unfolded it, set it up in the corner where it used to be. The apartment looked different with it there, less empty, more like a place where something could happen. I stood in front of it for a long time, just looking at the blank space where a canvas would go. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from something else. Something I couldn't name. I thought about all the nights I'd stood here, brush in hand, wondering if anyone would ever see what I made. All the prayers I'd whispered into the dark, asking God if he even cared about this dream of mine. All the times I'd felt forgotten, unseen, left behind. And now, standing here with the morning light streaming through the window, I understood. He'd never left. He'd been here the whole time, in the waiting, in the silence, in the nights when I thought I couldn't keep going. He'd been preparing something I couldn't see. Something I didn't even know I needed. You thought you were forgotten. I was preparing the room. The thought came like a wave, so strong it almost knocked me over. I grabbed the edge of the easel to steady myself, and before I knew it, I was crying. Not the desperate, angry tears I'd cried weeks ago. These were different. Softer, cleaner. Like rain after a long drought. I sank down onto the floor, my back against the wall, and let it all pour out. The years of frustration, the jealousy, the shame, the exhaustion, all of it. I let it go. And in the quiet that followed, I prayed. Not the kind of prayer where you ask for things. Not the kind where you bargain or plead or try to convince God to see things your way. Just the kind where you sit in his presence and say thank you. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Thank you for writing a story I didn't know how to write. I don't know how long I sat there. Time felt different, slower, fuller, like every second carried weight. When I finally stood up, I felt lighter. Not because my circumstances had changed, though they had, but because something inside me had shifted. Some locked door in my chest had opened, and the light was pouring in. I walked over to the box of paints, picked up a tube of titanium white, squeezed a little onto my thumb just to feel it. smooth and cool and familiar. I smiled. Then I picked up a canvas, an old one I'd been saving for something special, and set it on the easel. It was blank, waiting, full of possibility. I didn't know what I was going to paint yet, but I knew I was going to paint, and that was enough. The week that followed felt like waking up from a long sleep. I met with Caroline on Thursday at the gallery. It was a small space, tucked between a bookstore and a coffee shop on a quiet street in downtown Fort Worth. The walls were white, the floors were polished concrete, and the light that came through the front windows was soft and even. Perfect for art. Caroline was exactly as I'd imagined. Warm, thoughtful, the kind of person who really looked at you when you talked. She showed me the space where my work would hang, told me about the other artists in the show, asked me questions about my process, my inspiration, my story. I told her about the open door, about the sketch from college, about the years of waiting and wondering if anyone would ever see what I made. She listened, really listened. And when I finished, she smiled. "That's the kind of story people need to hear," she said. "Art isn't just about what's on the canvas. It's about what it cost to put it there." I thought about that all the way home, what it cost. And I realized it had cost me everything. My pride, my plans, my idea of what success was supposed to look like. But in losing all of that, I'd found something better. Something truer. I'd found faith. Not the kind that demands proof or guarantees. The kind that trusts, even when you can't see the ending. The kind that waits in the dark and believes the light is coming. That night, I stood in front of my easel and started to paint. Not the open door, not yet, but something else. Something that had been growing inside me for weeks. A landscape, Texas hill country, golden light, wide sky. The kind of place where you can see for miles and still feel like you're standing at the edge of something infinite. I painted for hours, lost track of time, forgot to eat, forgot to check my phone. I just painted. And as I did, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of struggle. Not the promise that everything would be easy from here on out. But the deep, unshakable knowing that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That every delay, every rejection, every night of doubt, it had all been leading here. To this moment, this canvas, this light. He never forgot. And finally, I believed it. The weeks leading up to the gallery opening passed in a blur. I painted like I hadn't painted in years, not frantically, not desperately, but with the kind of steady focus that comes when you're no longer trying to prove something, when you're just creating because that's what you were made to do. I finished 5 new pieces. Each one felt different from anything I'd done before. Deeper, more honest. Like I'd finally stopped trying to paint what I thought people wanted to see and started painting what I needed to say. The open door was there, in every piece, in different forms. Sometimes literal, sometimes suggested, always present. Caroline came by my apartment one afternoon to see the work. She stood in front of each canvas for a long time, not saying anything, just looking. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "These are beautiful," she said. "But more than that, they're true. You can feel it. Whatever you went through to get here, it's in the work." I nodded. I didn't trust myself to speak. "People are going to connect with this," she said. I can feel it. The opening was on a Friday night in mid-January. The kind of winter evening in Texas where the air is crisp and clean, and the sky holds on to the last traces of daylight longer than it should. I arrived early, before anyone else, and stood in the gallery looking at my work on the walls. It felt surreal. After all those years of imagining this moment, it was actually happening. But it didn't feel the way I thought it would. I'd always imagined I'd feel triumphant, validated, like I'd finally arrived. Instead, I just felt grateful, humbled, like I was standing in the middle of a story I didn't write, but was honored to be part of. Caroline came up beside me, holding 2 glasses of wine. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Honestly," I said, "I don't know. It doesn't feel real yet." She smiled. "It will. Just wait." People started arriving around 6:30. Small groups at first. Couples, friends, a few people I recognized from the Fort Worth art scene. And then more. The gallery filled up slowly, the sound of conversation rising, soft music playing in the background. I stood near the back, watching people look at my work. Really look at it. Some of them stood close, studying the brushstrokes. Others stood back, taking it all in. A woman in a gray sweater stopped in front of the largest piece, the one I'd titled "The Expected End." She stared at it for a long time, and I saw her wipe her eyes. Something in my chest tightened. I'd spent so many years wondering if my art mattered, if anyone would care, if it would make a difference. And here was the answer. Standing in front of me in a gray sweater, crying because something I made had touched her. A young guy approached me around 7:30. He looked like a college student, early 20s, wearing a flannel shirt and carrying a worn backpack. He had that nervous energy of someone who wasn't quite sure if he belonged. "Are you the artist?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "That's me." He nodded like he was trying to work up the courage to say something. Finally, he spoke. "I'm a student at TCU, art major. I've been thinking about quitting lately. It just feels like there's no point, you know? Like, why keep trying if no one's ever going to see it?" I felt something twist in my chest. I knew exactly what he meant. I'd said those same words to myself 100 times. "But then I came here tonight," he continued, "and I saw your work. And I read the statement on the wall about how long you've been doing this, about the waiting, and I needed to hear that. I needed to know someone else has felt this way and made it through." I looked at him, really looked at him, saw myself 5 years ago, 10 years ago, every version of me that had stood in the dark wondering if the light would ever come. "Don't quit," I said. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. "I know it's hard. I know it feels impossible sometimes. But don't quit. Not because you're going to get famous or make a lot of money or have some big breakthrough, but because what you make matters, even if only one person sees it, even if that one person is you." He nodded, his eyes bright. "Thank you," he said. "Really." He walked away, and I had to step outside for a moment. The Texas night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like paint flecks. I leaned against the brick wall and closed my eyes, and I felt it all hit me at once. This was why. All those years of waiting, all those nights of doubt, all those prayers that felt like they disappeared into silence. This was why. Not for the gallery show, not for the recognition, but for that kid, for that woman in the gray sweater, for everyone who would walk through those doors and see something that reminded them they weren't alone. I thought about Jeremiah 29:11 again. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. An expected end. I'd always thought that meant the ending I wanted, the success I'd dreamed of, the validation I'd been chasing. But standing there under the Texas stars, I realized it meant something different. It meant the ending God expected, the one he'd been preparing all along, the one that wasn't just about me, but about everyone my story would touch. Every person who needed to hear that waiting isn't wasted, that delay isn't denial, that God's timing is always, always perfect, even when it doesn't feel like it. I went back inside. The gallery was fuller now, buzzing with conversation. I moved through the crowd, listening to snippets of dialogue, watching people connect with the work. And as I did, I started to see it. The fingerprints. Every moment of waiting had taught me something. Patience, humility, dependence on God instead of my own efforts. If the gallery had called me 2 years ago, I wouldn't have been ready. I would have been painting for the wrong reasons, chasing approval instead of truth, trying to prove something instead of share something. The silence I'd endured had been necessary. It had stripped away everything false until all that was left was the real thing, the true thing. And that's what people were responding to now. Not technical skill, not clever compositions, but honesty, vulnerability, the evidence of a soul that had been through the fire and come out refined. I thought about all the nights I'd sat in my apartment, feeling forgotten, feeling invisible, wondering if God even saw me. And now I understood. He'd been there the whole time, in every rejection letter, teaching me that my worth wasn't tied to other people's opinions. In every quiet night, teaching me to hear his voice instead of the noise. In every moment of loneliness, teaching me that I was never actually alone. Now you see why I made you wait? The thought came like a breath, so gentle I almost missed it. But I heard it, and I felt it settle into the deepest part of me, the place where truth lives. Yes, I thought. Now I see. Caroline found me near the end of the night. The crowd had thinned, just a few people left, lingering over the last pieces. 3 paintings sold, she said, her eyes bright. And I have 2 more people interested. This is a really good night. I smiled. The sales mattered, sure. They meant I could pay rent for a few more months, keep buying supplies, keep creating. But that's not what made my chest feel full. It was the conversations, the tears, the young artist who decided not to quit, the woman in the gray sweater who told me my work reminded her why she still believed in beauty, the older man who'd stood in front of the expected end and said, "This is what hope looks like." That's what made it worth it. The gallery closed at 10. I helped Caroline turn off the lights, lock the doors. We stood outside on the sidewalk for a moment, the Fort Worth skyline glowing softly in the distance. "You should be proud," she said. "I am," I said. "But more than that, I'm grateful." She smiled. "Good. That's the right way to feel." I drove home slowly, taking the long way, windows down, letting the cool night air fill the car. I thought about where I'd been a few months ago, packing away my brushes, deleting my portfolio, convinced I'd missed my chance. And now, here I was. Not because I'd forced something to happen, not because I'd figured it all out, but because I'd finally let go, finally trusted that God's plan was better than mine, finally believed that His timing was worth the wait. When I got home, I walked straight to the windowsill where the old sketchbook still sat, open to the drawing of the door. I picked it up, held it in the light, and whispered the verse out loud. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. I closed the book, set it down, and looked around my small apartment, the easel in the corner, the paints on the table, the empty canvases waiting to be filled. This was my expected end. Not the final chapter, but the next one. The one where I kept creating, not for recognition or approval, but because I'd been made to make. The one where I trusted God with the timing and the outcomes and all the things I couldn't control. The one where I finally understood. He never forgot. Not for a single moment. Not for a single second. He was writing my story all along, even when I couldn't see the words. Even when the pages looked blank. And the story was more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. The months after the gallery show felt different. Not easier, exactly, but clearer. Like I'd been walking through fog for years, and suddenly the air had cleared, and I could see where I was going. Not the whole path, just the next few steps. And that was enough. I kept painting, not frantically, like I was trying to prove something, not desperately, like I was afraid the opportunity would disappear. Just steadily, consistently, showing up at my easel the way you show up for someone you love, with faithfulness, with presence. Caroline invited me to do another show in the spring. Smaller galleries in Dallas and Austin started reaching out. Nothing huge, nothing that would make me famous or rich, but enough to keep me going, enough to remind me that what I made mattered. But the thing that changed most wasn't the opportunities. It was me. I started going to a small group at my church. I'd grown up going to church, but I'd drifted away in college. And after that, I'd only gone on holidays when I was visiting my parents. It felt like something I was supposed to do, not something I wanted to do. But after everything that had happened, after seeing how God had been writing my story, even when I couldn't see the pen, I wanted to be around people who understood that. People who knew what it meant to wait on the Lord. The group met on Wednesday nights in someone's living room. 8 or 9 of us, sitting in a circle with coffee and worn Bibles, talking about faith and doubt and all the messy, beautiful parts of following Jesus. I didn't say much at first, just listened. Let other people's stories wash over me like rain. But one night in March, the leader, a man named David with kind eyes and graying hair, asked if anyone wanted to share about a time when God's timing surprised them. I felt something stir in my chest. I looked around the circle, saw faces I'd come to know. Rachel, who was struggling with infertility. Marcus, who'd been out of work for 8 months. Jen, who was taking care of her aging mother and wondering if she'd ever have a life of her own again. People who were waiting. People who were wondering if God had forgotten them. I took a breath and started talking. I told them about the years of obscurity, about watching my friends succeed while I stayed stuck, about packing away my brushes and deleting my portfolio, about finding the old sketch of the open door and the verse written in the margin, about the phone call that changed everything. I told them about the gallery show, about the young artist who'd been thinking about quitting, about the woman in the gray sweater who'd cried in front of my painting. And I told them what I'd learned. Waiting isn't punishment, I said, my voice steady but soft. It's preparation. God wasn't ignoring me all those years. He was teaching me, shaping me, getting me ready for something I couldn't have handled if it had come sooner. The room was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels sacred. I used to think that if God loved me, He'd give me what I wanted when I wanted it, I continued. But now I know that if God loves me, and He does, He'll give me what I need when I need it. Even if I don't understand the timing, even if it hurts to wait. Rachel wiped her eyes. Marcus nodded slowly. Jen smiled. That sad, hopeful smile of someone who's still in the middle of the story but starting to believe there's a good ending. After the group ended, a young woman approached me. I'd seen her there before but hadn't learned her name yet. She looked like she was in her mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and tired eyes that carried too much weight for someone so young. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked. "Of course," I said. We stepped outside onto the porch. The Texas night was warm, the air thick with the smell of jasmine and cut grass. She leaned against the railing and stared out at the street. "I'm about to give up on something," she said quietly. "Something I've been praying about for 3 years. I feel like God's answer is just silence. And I don't know how much longer I can keep hoping." I knew that feeling, knew it in my bones. "What are you waiting for?" I asked. She hesitated, then spoke. "I want to be a nurse. I've applied to programs 7 times. 7. And every time, I get rejected. My grades are good. My test scores are good. But there's always someone better, someone with more experience, someone who gets picked instead of me." Her voice cracked. "I'm starting to think maybe I'm not supposed to do this. Maybe I misunderstood what God wanted." I looked at her, saw myself in every word. "Can I tell you something?" I said. She nodded. "Every rejection you've received? Every closed door? It's not God saying no. It's God saying not yet. And I know that's hard to hear. I know it feels like the same thing. But it's not." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, opened the photo gallery, scrolled until I found a picture of the old sketchbook, the one with the open door. "I drew this when I was in college," I said, showing her the screen. I'd forgotten about it for years. But God hadn't. He kept it safe until the exact moment I needed to see it again. And when I did, everything changed. She studied the image, then looked up at me. "What if that moment never comes for me?" she whispered. "It will," I said. "Maybe not the way you expect. Maybe not in the timing you choose, but it will come. Because God doesn't forget His children. He doesn't forget their dreams. He just knows better than we do when we're ready to carry them." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "How do you stay faithful when you can't see the ending?" I thought about that. Really thought about it. "You trust the author," I said finally. "You remember that he's writing a better story than you could write for yourself. And you keep showing up, even when it's hard, even when you don't feel like it. You keep showing up and doing the next right thing, and you let God handle the rest." She smiled, a real smile this time, and nodded. "Thank you," she said. I needed to hear that. We went back inside, and as the night ended and people started to leave, I felt it again. That sense of purpose, that knowing that my story wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who needed to hear. The waiting is not wasted. That God's delays are not God's denials. That He's always working, even when we can't see it. I drove home that night with the windows down, the cool air filling the car, and I prayed. Not for more success or more opportunities or more recognition, just for faithfulness, for the strength to keep showing up, for the wisdom to trust God's timing, for the courage to share my story with anyone who needed to hear it. When I got home, I walked over to the windowsill. The old sketchbook was still there, right where I'd left it. I picked it up, turned to the page with the door, and read the verse one more time. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. An expected end. Not my end. His end. The one He'd been planning all along. The one that was always going to be better than anything I could imagine. I closed the book and held it against my chest for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the history of it, the proof that God had been with me even when I thought I was alone. Then I set it back on the windowsill and turned to look at my easel. There was a fresh canvas on it, blank and waiting. I'd start painting tomorrow. Something new. Something that reflected this season of peace and gratitude and trust. But tonight, I just wanted to sit in the quiet and remember. Remember the years of struggle. Remember the nights of doubt. Remember the moment I almost gave up. And remember the phone call that changed everything. Not because it brought success, but because it proved that God had been there all along. Writing, weaving, working. Keep creating. I'm still writing your story. The thought came like a whisper, gentle and certain. And I smiled because I knew it was true. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. And there would be more waiting, more seasons of uncertainty, more moments when I'd wonder if God still saw me. But now I knew the answer. He sees. He always sees. And He never, ever forgets. I walked over to my small bookshelf and pulled out my Bible. It was old, the leather cover soft and worn from years of use. I flipped to Jeremiah 29:11 and read the verse in context, something I hadn't done in a long time. The passage was written to people in exile, people who'd been torn from their homes and were living in a foreign land, wondering if God had abandoned them. And God's message to them was simple. I haven't forgotten you. I have plans for you. Plans for peace, plans for a future, plans for hope. I thought about that. About how the verse wasn't written to people who had it all together. It was written to people who were in the middle of the hardest season of their lives, people who were waiting, people who were wondering, people who were afraid they'd been forgotten. And God's answer to them, His answer to me, was the same. I know the thoughts I think toward you. Thoughts of peace, thoughts of hope, thoughts of an expected end. I closed the Bible and set it on the table. Looked around my small apartment, at the easel, at the paints, at the sketchbook on the windowsill, at the life I'd built piece by piece through years of faithfulness and doubt and everything in between. And I felt it. Peace, not the absence of struggle, not the promise that everything would always be easy, but the deep, unshakable knowing that I was held, that I was seen, that I was loved, that He never forgot, and He never would. I sat down on the futon and whispered a prayer into the quiet. Lord, teach me to trust your timing. Help me remember on the hard days that you're still writing, that every delay has a purpose, that every closed door is leading me toward the one you've been preparing all along. And help me share this story with anyone who needs to hear it, anyone who's waiting, anyone who's wondering if you remember their name. I paused, feeling the words settle. Thank you, I whispered, for never forgetting me. The apartment was quiet. The Texas night pressed soft against the windows, and somewhere in the stillness, I felt it, that gentle presence that had been with me all along, in the waiting, in the doubt, in the surrender. The one who opens doors, the one who writes stories, the one who never forgets. I picked up a pen and a piece of paper from the table, wrote down one thing I'd been holding on to, one thing I needed to surrender, one thing I needed to trust God with. My timing. I folded the paper and tucked it into my Bible at Jeremiah 29:11. A reminder, a prayer, a promise to keep trusting, even when I couldn't see the next step. Then I turned off the lights and climbed into bed. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I fell asleep with a smile on my face, because I finally understood. God was writing my story, and it was more beautiful than I ever could have dreamed. He never forgot. May you remember that tonight, tomorrow. Every day you find yourself waiting in the dark, wondering if He sees you. He does. He always has. And He always will. May this peace find you. May you trust His timing. May you believe that what He's preparing is worth the wait. And may you never forget. He never forgot you.